BirdLife is the oldest and largest network of independent national conservation NGOs on the planet. All the logos that you see on the slide are the independent local conservation organizations that are part of the BirdLife family. We are a family of 115 partners in 113 countries. Each partner is truly a local organization, and we all come together with one single vision: conserve birds as the best ambassador of nature, so we can build a world where nature and people live in greater harmony, more equitably and sustainably. It is the diversity and breadth of the nature of our partnership that makes us very unique. You see, BirdLife doesn't parachute initiatives in different parts of the world, but rather create solutions from the ground up with local organizations who understand the reality of their own land, informed by world-class science and global innovation. The science we're about to have the session that we're about to have is the perfect example of what BirdLife does. We're here with 4 of our partners from Asia and the Americas, who will speak about their impressive forest conservation work in some of the world's most threatened and important landscapes for conservation. The magic comes when these local initiatives are wrapped in a global program where we learn from each other and create more effective and innovative ways to conserve forests globally while strengthening livelihoods locally to protect people and nature. The other thing that makes, Katie, can you move that to the next slide, please? Thank you. The other thing that makes BirdLife very special is our focus on birds. They are not only the best indicators of environmental health, but birds connect us all. Through the lockdown, many of us have been able to connect with nature through birds, whether by hearing them as there is not so much noise outside, or watching them or on our gardens or on our daily walks. Birds are connecting us to nature. And they show us that we are all on this together. See, through the migration, birds remind us all that we are all connected, that we're all on this together. It is the power of flight that makes birds a symbol of liberty and freedom. It's this juxtaposition of freedom and connectivity that inspires the BirdLife Partnership to work together, to bring together local achievements to secure global impact. But it's not just the birds that we care about, it's their habitats. Those habitats they share with countless other species, including us. Those habitats that provide the priceless ecosystem services we all depend on. Forests are one of the most critical habitats for birds, and forests are critical for people too. No matter where you live or who you are, we all depend on forests globally for our climate, for our food, and countless other aspects of our daily lives. So enjoy this session. Thank you so much for joining us. And allow me to introduce Alice Ward-Francis, BirdLife's Forest Program Officer, so she can tell us more about what we're going to do, what we are doing to conserve forests for birds and people.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Hello and welcome to our session at Global Landscapes Forum. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to be hosting you today in our interactive and energized session, bringing together presenters from across the globe. Our action-packed agenda includes an outline framer, a set of inspiring landscape case studies from Brazil, Paraguay, Cambodia, and Indonesia, which I really can't wait to hear. We'll be joined by 3 expert speakers from the conservation finance sector, sharing their ideas on how we accelerate the solutions and what the opportunities really are for sustainable funding and financing. We'll be able to learn from your wisdom with an open Q&A, so do get ready with your questions. And finally, we'll wrap up with some key messages. So we were really keen to bring you all together today to explore a topic that is at the heart of a lot of our work in BirdLife's Forest Programme, and we know is shared by you across your landscape initiatives too, and that is the Sustainability Challenge. So sadly, as we all know, we are still losing some of the most important forests for biodiversity. In fact, roughly a quarter of our tropical forests have been lost since 1950. And this is really shocking when you think that forests are home to around 80% of the world's land-based biodiversity and provide essential ecosystem services upon which we all depend. And that includes, of course, for food. So As a global community, we've responded to this crisis with big commitments to change and to finance this change. And we are now all working really, really hard to turn these commitments into the reality on the ground. But of course, this is extremely challenging. The scale of money being committed to conservation is huge. And in order to tackle the sustainability challenge, we are moving away from the traditional grant models that NGOs are built on towards much more diverse approaches from the business and finance sector. And that's really helping us to tackle this long-term issue of how we can sustain our impact. But now we're needing to develop models, markets, mechanisms, and deliver impact, scale, and potentially a return on investment if we are to access these new opportunities. And yet, in the most important places for biodiversity, we've actually lacked structures that can absorb big sums of money or channel private finance. There's limited technical knowledge to articulate ideas and models to show our impact in a way that really speaks to these new opportunities. And it's also difficult to develop programs that can reflect this desired level of scale that are also realistic in these contexts. For example, in Sierra Leone and Liberia, our partners are working with local people to conserve a huge tract of wonderful tropical forest and have been doing so for decades. Great progress has been made in developing carbon credits and sustainable cocoa supply chain as potential revenue for supporting conservation and local livelihoods. And this has required development of new multi-stakeholder governance and financing structures, extensive input from a wide range of technical experts, and a lot of donor funding. And we still aren't there yet on our sustainability journey. And so, despite decades of experience and a real strong track record for delivering impact on the ground, many organisations that are really critical to turning these big global commitments into reality are in danger of being left out. So I can hear you ask, what are you doing about it then? Well, BirdLife has brought together a group of our front-running partners, the landscape leaders who are exploring a diverse set of forest-positive solutions, approaches that are conserving priority biodiversity, enabling and empowering local people and livelihoods, producing sustainable food, and aiming to do so in the long term. And we've brought these innovators together in our accelerator. Our accelerator is delivering a direct, multifaceted support package, which includes seed investment, collaborations, learning, and promotion opportunities, which is enabling our partners with the big ideas to develop them in a supportive environment. And we are then going to work collaboratively to address specific challenges we're facing in accessing sustainable funding and financing for these critical landscapes. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Katie to dive in a little deeper into what we mean. Over to you, Katie.
Thanks, Alice. Thank you for your introduction. Well, in order to solve these big global challenges, we've been looking at this question: what shapes a sustainable landscape? So landscapes don't just consist of mountains, rivers, forests, and people. They are made up of decisions. So let's make a decision. Let's choose unsustainable farming. Landscapes are formed by the decisions people make. These decisions are influenced by local, national, and global forces. It's complex. Some decisions harm the landscape. Removing forest in order to raise cattle or plant cash crops, this happens a lot. Weather can be unpredictable, markets fluctuate. In some cases, these systemic issues make farming unviable. It forces people into situations, even illegal activities. One decision can have many knock-on effects. If natural systems fail, food systems fail too. So let's make a different decision. I'm going to choose forest-positive farming. Given the right incentives, things can change. Incentives drive decisions. We can choose to reward forest-positive solutions. We can use people's skills for forest-positive results. Look, now we've connected up this forest. Amazing. Well-managed landscapes meet the needs of the present without compromising the future. This is linked to every choice we make in the supermarket, every politician we elect, every business we invest in. But we are pragmatic. Landscapes need to produce food. Landscapes will change. So we need to start to value our natural spaces and wildlife. Enable profitable forest-positive solutions with a long-term vision so that both people and wildlife can thrive. The BirdLife Accelerator is investing in bold, sustainable solutions for tropical forests around the world. Take a look at this incredible landscape. What's your next decision? So I would like to take you now. I would like to say, to help you with this decision, we have brought together today some of the most pioneering landscape leaders that we work with. These people are working in some of the world's most threatened forest landscapes, both most threatened, but with the most potential for change. This is why we are supporting these front-running BirdLife partners to find new solutions and incentivize new ways of working. I want to show you now. As you can see, we are working in a range of countries and landscapes. As you can see here. And just as the landscapes are varied, the solutions are varied too. It could be a sustainable product or supply chain, so that the uniqueness of the landscape is rewarded by the markets, and the ecosystem services that the forest provides is accounted for. It could be through ecotourism. It could be developing long-term corporate partnerships, influencing fiscal policy, and working with banks for the right credit systems. Each landscape has a strategy, which we invest in through seed grants to give them the boost that they need to reach scale. As a result, we have a host of best practice models being developed, some of which we will share with you today. These landscape leaders will not only share their models and ideas, though, they will also share their realities on the ground. These are realities about endangered places where they work. For our landscape leaders, this is not just a job, this is a passion. You guys are really lucky to catch them online because normally they are in the forest working with the people to protect the natural ecosystems we all rely on. So with no further delay, we are going to San Rafael, one of the largest fragments of Atlantic forest left in Paraguay. We are visiting Evelyn. Over to you, Evelyn.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Katie. So I would like to start with a question. I would like to ask you if you have ever thought that you could help us to conserve the Atlantic forest by drinking a cup of mate. The Atlantic forest is one of the most diverse and threatened hotspots of the world. It is estimated that only 7% of its original cover remains to date. Reserve for San Rafael National Park is one of the biggest Atlantic forest remnants in Paraguay. Over 400 species have been recorded at the area, bird species, including globally endangered ones. Likewise, the area is an important source of the Guarani Aquifer, one of the world's largest freshwater reservoirs. As you can tell, this land is vital for people, and especially for the Guarani indigenous people. They still rely on forest resources for their subsistence. This reserve is one of the most important areas of the country for the production of yerba mate, a tree that is native to the Atlantic forest, one of Paraguay's basic food products, besides being one of the main cash crops for landholders at the area. Moreover, another food product that comes from the area and from native species is honey. San Rafael was created in 1992. However, to the date, it is still a park only in paper. Besides the lack of legal protection, there is logging, deforestation, illegal poaching, and crops. Therefore, in order to build better strategies for people, livelihoods, and food systems, we need to meet their needs while protecting forests, biodiversity, and water resources. Wira Paraguay started working at the area in order to study and protect birds. Afterwards, it established a private reserve. However, we soon realized that the threats required a more innovative approach that worked with communities. For this reason, we decided to work on shade-grown yerba mate. But what is yerba mate? You can see some plants there, some seedlings. And you can also see it in my tea. This is how we drink it. It has many natural health benefits. So in 2016, we began working with communities to support them to produce organic and fair trade yerba mate and export it to higher value markets. This brought higher profitability to this tree crop. The Aguarani indigenous community and over 50 small landholders are managing more than 1 hectare of shade-grown yerba mate in San Rafael, as well as Wira Paraguay. The profits will contribute for the management of the protected area. Yerba mate brings benefits for farmers and their families, improving their income and livelihoods. It is a win-win for all of the people involved. Moreover, this investment will help us to establish a local producers committee, besides a business unit that will enable us to seek for higher value markets for yerba mate. Our business plan shows that the business will be profitable from the 3rd year on. With this strategy, we are investing in the success for the future of our forest. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you, Evelyn, especially for joining us so early in the morning. I'm also enjoying some yerba mate tea over here. It is delicious, so thank you very much. What an inspiring story, right, guys? Could you have imagined that a simple cup of tea can transform the future of a landscape? Well, now we travel 700 kilometers away in another beautiful fragment of the same Atlantic forest. We have another early bird. We meet Elise from Brazil, who is seeking new ways to transform the landscape, connecting up islands of forest and supporting the very food systems that we rely on. Over to you, Elise.
Thanks, Katie. Hello, everyone. I am Elise Reisfeld from Savi, Brazil, the BirdLife partner in the country, and I would like to welcome you to the Serra do Urubu-Murici corridor in the heart of the Atlantic forest of northeastern Brazil. This unique landscape houses some of the last remaining patches of Atlantic forest in the northeast of the country, which is a beautiful region and is home to many species which you can only find here and nowhere else in the world. Unfortunately, it is also one of the most threatened biodiversity hotspots on Earth, besides being a source of water for over 300,000 people. However, there are many opportunities here too, as there is a high amount of potential areas to recover degraded lands and increase productivity using climate-smart agriculture. So to give you a clear view, this corridor has 1 public protected area and a few smaller private protected areas, including our private reserve. However, there is a huge forest debt of gallery forests located in private lands that should be restored to comply with the Brazilian forest law. Unfortunately, as you can see in this aerial image, this is a highly fragmented landscape, which leads to a severe loss of biodiversity. I see these forest patches like islands surrounded by a sea of cattle ranches and sugarcane, and they are home to several endangered bird species, including the Alagoas antwern, a tiny gray bird which is very mysterious and with a population of less than 30 individuals remaining in the world. We can still save this one by recovering its habitat and avoiding the same fate as 2 of its cousins, which became extinct in this region very recently, sadly. And I don't want to see that happen again. And other challenges faced here are land degradation, besides a high level of poverty. This is one of the poorest regions in Brazil. And one of the main funding challenges we face here are the high cost of forest restoration and the fact that few large international donors are interested in funding projects in the Atlantic forest, as the focus is usually on the Amazon. So in this scenario, we're starting to implement a forest restoration program in private lands along the corridor, integrated with the production of sustainable commodities through agroforestry, which can increase the livelihoods of local landowners with the production of fruits, timber, seeds, and roots. And besides that, our project also aims to engage the local community, helping them with this process. What we want to see are small landowners restoring their lands using agroforestry to produce commodities. And we also want to help them comply with the Brazilian forest law, meaning that they need to preserve at least a minimum amount of forest inside their properties and erase the forest that I mentioned earlier. These are our plans for the landscape. We have just started working on this, but we've been here for the past 15 years working on a smaller scale in this region. And so far, we've managed to implement 2 private reserves to help establish and support the management of a public protected area, to protect hundreds of bird species, to involve more than 5,000 people in education and outreach activities. And it's amazing to take them to our reserve and see their reactions on the first time they ever set foot in a forest in their lives. And we've also implemented 1 agroforestry demonstrative unit. And in parallel, we're engaging a variety of stakeholders in the project, from big international donors to local rural associations. And we have managed to bring back high-profile NGOs to work in the region again in collaboration with us. So this landscape is huge, and we've received a large investment so far, but only considering traditional conservation grants and our efforts in our private reserve, focusing on this smaller scale. However, considering a landscape approach to continue with the project, integrating restoration with food production throughout this entire area, we need an investment of about $700,000 for 3 years. And with this investment, we expect to increase the connectivity between these forest fragments, protecting this region's unique and endangered biodiversity, while also helping to reduce poverty and recovering degraded lands through restoration and agroforestry. We want people to restore and protect forests while also making profits from it. We want them to be able to profit from producing sustainable food commodities. And I can't forget to mention our mission, which is to do all of this while saving birds from the brink of extinction. We want to do this while saving the Alagoas entran, which is the tiny gray bird I mentioned earlier with less than 30 individuals. And you can see him here on the slide. And thanks to our partners and donors from BirdLife International, the Hempel, Jensen, and Marshall Reynolds Foundations, WWF Netherlands and Brazil, and the American Bird Conservancy, we are being able to pull this off. But we still need a lot of help to achieve all of this in this challenging scenario. And it would be amazing if even you can help us. But for now, thank you for listening and for visiting this amazing landscape.
Wow, thank you, Elise. We love your passion for that mysterious ant wren. So don't forget, guys out there, if you have a question for our landscape leaders, now is the time to ask before they dive back into the forest once more. So now we are going to go across the globe to the tropical mosaic landscape in the eastern plains of Cambodia. We are going to visit the landscape of Lomfat, a place where you can find the sacred bird of Cambodia, the giant ibis, and where finally, after many years of campaigning, our colleague Vorsak has been granted the mandate to protect this incredible place for people and biodiversity. Over to you, Vorsak.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Thank to organizer for providing opportunity to BirdLife Cambodia to present our work in saving forests and wildlife in Lompat landscapes. My name is Vorsak. I'm a head of Cambodia programs at BirdLife International. Lompat cover an area of 250,000 hectares. It's a mosaic landscapes. It include natural forests, community land, and plantation. Lompat is a key biodiversity area. We record so far more than 300 bird and mammal species, include 5 critically endangered bird species. Importantly, is our national symbol bird of Cambodia is giant ibis. The population of the giant ibis in the world right now is just over 250 birds in the world. There are 26 villages located in and around this landscape. Most of those villagers are indigenous peoples and ethnic groups. They are heavily dependent on the natural resource in this landscape for their daily consumption. BirdLife have been working here for 15 years. We have seen a lot of change. In 2010, government of Cambodia had introduced a new land use policy called economic land concession to Lompat. It was a disaster for conservation. This land use policy resulted in native forests being converted into industrial plantation, banana and rubbers by the private sector. Most of the private sector is Vietnamese company. But in 2013, the government stopped this policy. Now we are there to say that we have mandate to protect the remaining forests. The same as the other landscape, we need to stop illegal logging, stop hunting, stop land encroachment. More importantly, we need to mitigate impact of road just building across the landscape, connect with two big provinces, Ratnagiri and Mandaluyong. This road put more pressure on the landscape. Of course, the industrial plantation, banana and rubber plantation give some job to local community, but they give very lower daily wage. The local people in India still depend on rain-feeded rice for their daily consumption. And more than that, they still catch fish from the forest, from the pond inside the forest and the river run across the forest for their protein, as well as water source, water from the pond inside the forest for people and wildlife during the dry season. Products from the forest are very important to local community. They need way to protect natural resource in long term. Much of our work in this landscape with ranger, with local community is depend on donor and charity. It's not a stable financial source. Long-term finance and commitment really need to support long-term conservation action. So far, our activities aim to safeguard biodiversity and support local peoples. We support government Focal Point, Ministry of Environment to protect and manage this protected area. We introduce monitoring system, and we do support build capacity the ranger to do law enforcement. We do engage with the private sector, especially the economic land concession owner and the other landscape actor through a forum at least 3 times per year. We want them to plan more responsibilities and exclusively alongside with civil society. Less than 1/3 of this area was set aside for co-management. We are hand in hand with the local community to set up community protected area. Just for your benefit, community protected area is a mechanism for building ownership to the forest. CPA is really important because they support people to be ownership of forest management, ensure sustainable use of natural resource, and build alternative income. For example, Wildlife Friendly Ride Initiative is BirdLife and our partner SMPI Beach Ride have been introduced successfully in another forest landscape in Cambodia. At the year, farmers receive a premium price by selling their rice up to 40% higher than market price. In etching, they agree not to hand, not to encroach, not to lock, and also not use chemicals. Ibis rice is organic rice. So in the last 3 years, this scheme was welcomed by local peoples. That's why we be able to increase the number of participating from 80 to more than 600 families. Ibis rice can introduce to Lompat. Lompat, we see a lot of potential in forest positive resolution. In last 5 years, we have scaled up our work in Lompat, have made some significant progress with the government and local communities. So far, we have invested this amount of money, as you see in the charts, and we need for this amount of money in the chart in order to go even more further. In the next 5 years, we will scale up our management action, go and also work with local community to introduce sustainable agriculture products. Wildlife friendly ride will be replicated in this landscape. And in addition, we will looking for other crops like cashew nuts, sesame, soybean, or wild honey. We'll continue restore area to its natural habitat so that the ecosystem service will be protected for wildlife and human. We will explore new opportunities like royalty carbon markets and trust fund. As I said, so far, we totally depend on donor and charity to cover on our conservation costs. These limit us and leave this landscape in unsustainable. We want to grow bigger impact for all. Therefore, we welcome for input and support from you all. Thank you for listening.
Wow, guys, did you hear that out there, the audience? Our landscape leaders are asking for your help. How can you support their vision? I believe in Vorsak. He knows this landscape. Wildlife-friendly rice really has the potential to change things for people and the environment. So thank you to Vorsak for taking us on this journey. It is really interesting to hear as well that Vorsak is exploring a carbon project. It is clear that a range of solutions are needed in order for the landscape transformation to be inclusive and productive. So speaking of this, we are now going to a place where you can experience this range of solutions. Adi from Indonesia never lets an idea go without testing it and bringing every landscape stakeholder involved in the landscape along with him. So over to you, Adi.
Thanks, Katie. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Some of you might be good evening. It is my pleasure to present in this very important webinar. My name is Adi Widianto, and I am from Burung, Indonesia, the national partner of BirdLife International in Indonesia. So welcome to Beliling Landscape. It is located in the western part of Flores Island. For many of you who are not familiar, the island is the natural home for Komodo dragon, among other endemic species, of course. So the Flores Island is located in the Wallacea subregion in central Indonesia. Then instead of having large mammals such as the western part of the country, it is more famous for high endemism, such that significant proportion of birds, amphibians, reptiles, and other taxa in the region are not found anywhere else. And all these natural wonders have been sustained for centuries, thanks to the local people who live around the landscape that takes good care of them with the natural belief system and traditional culture in resource use. So the Beliling landscape itself is an expanse of nearly 100,000 hectares of both forest and non-forest area. It is the biggest forest area of the West Manggarai district and holds the biggest water catchment for all the local people's needs, from households, from farm irrigation to district electricity generation, and also supporting the expanding tourism industry in the nearby city of Labuan Bajo. However, rapid population growth has put pressure on the natural ecosystem and the traditional food system, including conversion of forest to agriculture. And on the other hand, the price of the farmers get for the key agroforestry commodities remains low due to poor post-harvest processing and lengthy value chains. The situation has left the local communities in poverty due to their lack of knowledge and capacity in sustainably intensifying their production areas. There is significant challenge in accessing a better and fair markets and an absence of financial investment to support business development. So this all has driven local expansion of farms into forest. This has also impacted upon ecosystem services that these local people actually rely on for their well-being and livelihood. So overall, this whole process draws both the nature and its people in an unsustainable circle to even greater poverty and ecosystem degradation. So what Burung have done about this? Since 2007, the first time when we work in the landscape, we engage all the local stakeholders in the development of collaborative action to address these challenges. We are improving the capacity of local communities in planning and managing their lands and ecosystem to achieve more sustainable livelihoods. We also work with local villages to develop agreements on land use and forest conservation. This has been brought together in a strategic landscape plan that was formally adopted by district government in 2015. We are working with the farmers cooperative to improve the quality of agroforest products, especially candlenut, and shorten the lengthy value chains to establish direct channel to wholesalers. This has brought significant benefits to local farmers for improving the price they get for their crops. So through the village business units as well, we are developing new business models. This includes community-based tourism, integrating with a social forestry scheme from the government, as well as a small-scale payment for environmental service, based on forest conservation action, providing clean water for local market sale. And this is all has been changing the game. And also to help with nurturing these small businesses, we help set up microfinance units across the villages to provide microcredits. And finally, at the policy level, we are also working with the Fiscal Policy Agency to increase budgetary incentives from district government to villages for implementing sustainable land use. Now, what we plan for the next chapter of program in the landscape. We are planning a set of investment to bring about broader changes to both the well-being of the people as well as the ecological function of the landscape. We want to engage more stakeholders and get their commitment to our strategic plan for the landscape. For example, we are exploring collaboration with the tourism sector so that we can develop community-based tourism. We want to see local communities also benefiting from the local tourism boom at the moment. On the other hand, land use planning has been a great investment. The participatory approach has been appreciated and embraced by all, including local government. We want to use this process to attract investment for carbon offsetting. On a micro level, land use planning supports community development. The people we are working with are managing land in a forest positive way. So we need to enable community to access better and fairer markets with new buyers and partnerships. As you can see, investing in BirdLife is not just giving you an economic return on investment, it is giving you social, ecological, and governance impacts, which are needed by the people who help to protect it. So thank you very much for listening, and I do hope to receive feedback from all of you.
Oh, well, thank you, Adi. Thank you for showing us how complex the landscape solutions can be and how this can be translated into a huge impact. Well done. So you guys out there, keep your questions coming for these landscape leaders. We have traveled around the world already this morning. We have seen forest positive solutions in the form of shade grown organic tea in Paraguay, food and forest corridors in Brazil, wildlife friendly rice is on the horizon in Cambodia, and vast inclusive and productive landscape solutions are underway in Indonesia. They have shown us the reality for them as landscape leaders in some of the most unique places on Earth. So now I'm going to hand back over to Alice to help us answer this question. How can we bridge the gap between the reality in these landscapes and the finance sector?
Wow, what an absolute privilege to hear from you guys. You're amazing, these landscape leaders, and about your forest positive solutions that you're exploring. Thank you so much for taking us to your inspiring landscapes. So, as we have heard, securing sustainable funding and financing is an essential step for our landscape leaders, but this is challenging and partners are really needing expert input to some of their key questions. And we are therefore very lucky to now be joined by 3 finance experts to help answer some of these challenging questions. So many thanks to you all for joining us. Firstly, I'd like to invite Marco Arlord, the Programme Officer with UNDP working on the Biofin Initiative. So please introduce yourself, Marco, the Biofin Initiative, and just giving us some headline thoughts on the topic so far. That would be wonderful. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Alice and Kathy. So first of all, I would like to say that I think we heard the best message possible from the previous presenters, that there is a huge amount of opportunities out there to finance biodiversity. We just heard about private protected area, PES, certification, microfinance, community agrobiodiversity products. We heard already a lot of opportunities, but there are even more. And so I'm actually here today to speak about Biofin. Biofin is a UNDP project which was built in 2012 when we realized that at that time there was a calculation that was saying that between 150 billion and 450 billion was the cost to reach our targets in biodiversity per year. And we calculated that we were spending only 52 billion per year. So there was a huge gap. So we know that there is a lot of biodiversity loss. We know that there is an important finance gap. How do we breach it now? How do we? And so Biofin was created to develop an innovative approach to design evidence-based biodiversity finance plan, because there was a feeling that this was extremely needed. So what I'm going to explain now is this methodologies that we are implementing currently in 35 developing countries. This methodology is actually available in the Biofin workbook that you can find in our website. Just have to write Biofin UNDP in any search engine. And so basically, what do we do in these 35 countries? We, again, develop evidence-based biodiversity finance plan. How do we do it? We cannot start directly by saying, okay, we need to do PES. No, we need to first have some background information. And that's why we do three main analyses. The first one being the policy and institutional review. You can see it on the graph on the bottom left. So here the idea is to really understand what are the main actors, the main policies, the main institutions that are influencing biodiversity finance. What are the main sectors also? Once we understand this, we do an inventory of all the existing finance mechanisms that are already there in the country, because I'm going to explain something a little bit later. Sometimes you're going to have much more impact by improving or enforcing an existing mechanism, which could be better implemented in the country. Sometimes it will cost you less and will have a much bigger impact. So it's really important to first understand what is there, what is in the country already existing. Then we also analyze all the harmful subsidies. For example, in some countries, we understood that actually some taxes are taken out from the imported fertilizers. So maybe there is a way to green those subsidies and still help the farmers without making it harmful to biodiversity. So once we have this basically understanding of all the finance in the country, we move into the finance institution and situation, we move into the biodiversity expenditure review. Here the aim is to understand how much are we actually spending for biodiversity. A lot of people think, oh, it's the Ministry of Environment spending. Not at all. Actually, a lot of others are spending also for biodiversity. And we found out forests, tourists, ministries, fishery, but also, for example, the Ministry of Defense in some countries where they are protecting protected areas. So there are a lot of other agents actually spending in biodiversity, and you need to understand where is the money, where is it coming from, in order to understand what are your priorities. For example, if there is a country where most of the biodiversity depends on international finance, what it means, one of the priorities is to build domestic finance mechanisms. Because, for example, in a crisis like we have today with the COVID, maybe some countries might have less finance to give to some other countries, which means we need to develop domestic finance mechanisms. Then we move into the financial needs assessment. Here the aim is to understand, okay, I have usually a plan, you have an NBSAP in your country, a strategic action plan, economic plans, which have biodiversity needs and targets. We have those targets, but how much do I need to reach those targets? So once we have all this understanding and those recommendations coming from this analysis, we can move into a biodiversity finance plan. And here, basically, the idea is to screen and prioritize the best innovative finance solution, meaning innovating doesn't have to mean fintech. It just have to mean that it's not there in the country yet. Or also using existing mechanisms, as I said before, can actually be extremely powerful for biodiversity. And so we screen them with criteria as like the best in impact financially, the best in biodiversity impact, as well as the feasibility. Those are extremely important because you might have a mechanism that is extremely impactful, but almost impossible to implement. So you're going to have a mix of finance solution for short-term, long-term, a little less feasible, a little more feasible, with more impact and less, that you need to prioritize, and that you need to implement. And so this biodiversity finance plan needs to be institutionalized in the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Environment, in the key sectors that are going to actually implement it and affect biodiversity finance. And when we mean biodiversity finance solution implementation, often people think, okay, it's to generate more revenues. It's just to create new source of revenues. Actually, biodiversity finance is a little more than just generating revenues. You need to think it also in a way of realigning expenditure. This is what we were talking for harmful subsidies. You can realign some of these expenditures and make them greener. You can think about delivering better. We found out that a lot of ministries of environment have budget lines that actually could be reviewed and linked to results so that they can be better delivered. And often the Ministry of Finance extremely appreciates result-based budgets. So actually often can also increase revenues for biodiversity. We also have avoiding future expenditure. This is something that is extremely important, for example, for small islands where invasive alien species can come and you never know the cost until you actually already have the species and you have to pay millions to take it out. So avoiding this cost is also a biodiversity finance. Putting $100,000 to avoid a future species that might cost you millions to take out is a biodiversity finance. And so to help with all this methodology, we created a biodiversity finance solution catalog where you have 160 finance solutions that shows this variety of opportunity that can be used. So on my side, this is a short explanation of what biofin is, and I'm happy to receive any question.
Thank you so much, Marco. That was really, really interesting, particularly just to hear about the enormous diversity of different mechanisms out there. That's a really strong theme that's coming through already as we're hearing from the landscape speakers. I'm now going to introduce Katalin Sholimoshi from Unique to the floor to provide her kind of opening statement and reflections so far. So over to you, Katalin. Thank you.
Thank you, and hello everyone out there on the internet. I hear that we have more than 600 people watching, so I'm very excited, and thank you again, BirdLife, for inviting me and bringing me on as a finance expert, so to say. I was asked to contribute just very little and very short input on myself, and then I'm mainly here for you guys on the internet out there to ask questions. So I'll give you a little bit of my background. I'm actually a trained forester, so I'm happy to answer also any questions regarding sustainable forestry. And I work for a consulting company. You can see our logo on the bottom right. It's called Unique Forestry and Land Use. And I myself work specifically for very different financial clients, actually. I used to work for the Inter-American Development Bank for a few years. So I have this background, this practical background in development finance. And I know Latin America quite well. So if you have specific questions to Latin American countries, that's my field of expertise. But I also currently work a lot in East and West Africa, and I have colleagues who work in Asia too, so I can link you to people. And since I have this financial background, I nowadays advise these famous so-called, some of these impact investment funds that I'm sure you've heard about them, and maybe some of them are even in the audience. So if the impact investors are out there in the audience looking for projects, I think that would be great if we can help to link them. But I'm also, what I also do is I help project developers in what's called a bankability support. So how can you take a project that is now maybe only grant financed? And as I saw in some presentations, it was regarded already as unsustainable, maybe because these grants can run out. How can you take such a project to make it commercially interesting to an investor who is seeking return? So I think I will stop here because I was given 3 minutes, I think. And so I'm happy to answer any questions here, and I'll have some links that I can share with you later, and I will upload here some documents if you like. So I'm here available for you. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Katalin. It's really valuable having your expertise on the panel today, and yeah, to hear about your examples that you've got to share with us will be super useful. So I'm going to now hand over to Jim Stevenson from Terranomics, just to give kind of an introduction to himself and to provide a few initial thoughts. That would be great. Over to you, Jim.
Thank you very much, Alice, and thank you to the whole BirdLife team for inviting us to speak. And for the previous presenters, I think there's already a lot of fantastic insights that have been provided this morning. So I'm the co-founder and a director at Terranomics. We are an organization that is focused on using local and global financial systems to support sustainable land use, conservation and climate change solutions, like the banner indicates there on the slide. We're primarily a consultancy, but in that guise, we focus on working with local financial systems in the countries that we work in to engage them on the topic of sustainable land use and conservation. And then we also support the development of investable conservation-focused projects around the world, together with impact investors and NGOs. We also have our own ventures arm where we invest in natural capital projects in the UK. At the moment, that focuses on something that we call the Tree Hub, which is a native tree nursery operation in the southwest of the UK, to help meet national and local reforestation and climate change goals. And it's really interesting to be in this session and to talk about the landscape programs people are implementing, because we want to use this tree nursery business as a way to have a broader landscape level engagement across the southwest of the UK, to further land restoration there, together with real estate, the livestock sector, tourism and water utilities. I was asked just to give a few big picture reflections on the world of landscape level investing. So I'll quickly do that. So we work a fair amount with some of the leading organisations in landscape level investment, people like the Landscape Finance Lab and IDH. And then within something called the Coalition for Private Investment in Conservation, there is also a landscape finance working group that brings all these organisations together to actually try and figure out some of the challenges in the sector and how to scale up investment. I think just the first big picture thing to say is that landscape level investments are tough. This is a tough business, because you're trying to combine two elements that are challenging in themselves. Firstly, implementing a genuine multi-sector landscape program where people are brought together under a consistent goal and vision is a whole exercise in itself and takes a lot of time. We've found that actually you're talking about 5 to 10 years here to implement genuine landscape level programs that can run under their own steam. But secondly, what you're also trying to bring into that are investable enterprises within that landscape and engaging investors to invest across that portfolio of projects, where these projects are trying to internalize externalities that their competitors in these industries are not having to worry about. So you're also having to address that issue. Just the final point I would make is that to really turn the tide on these issues and these issues around deforestation, degradation, we need to go beyond impact investment and bespoke transactions. These are normally quite high transaction cost type of enterprises, and we need to be able to engage the mainstream finance sector in these countries in the possibilities in biodiversity friendly investing. Just to illustrate this, I agree with what Marco said, that often the most efficient way to do this is to better align existing finance flows to the regulations that you have. And a recent study that we did with Cornell University showed that the value per year of illegally sourced deforestation commodities, so those are just your big four commodities and fisheries, is $85 billion a year. So that's a huge opportunity to redirect those financing flows that are driving biodiversity loss, and potentially direct some of that towards biodiversity positive or friendly practices, which I can talk more about in the discussion. That's all from me.
Thank you very, very much, Jim. So in preparing for this session, we asked our landscape leaders to put forward some of the key questions that they wanted to hear your thoughts on. I also just want to take a moment to ask for those in the audience, if you've got questions or comments on the discussion so far, please do get posting in the chat box. I know we've got a lot coming through, so yeah, keep those coming. But yes, to kick us off, I'd like to come back to Marco and just to ask, what are the kinds of examples of models and solutions that you've really seen working in these types of kind of forest landscapes? You know, really exciting new approaches that you've seen emerging. It would be great to hear from you about that.
Thanks a lot, Alice. Actually, to answer this question, I just want to come back to something that Katie said at the beginning in this great animation,
of course,
which was that the landscape are made by decision. So I fully agree. Often you will need to have in mind this context so that you can build the best finance solution possible that was made by decisions. And so, for example, in Philippines, we're working with Gcash, which is a fintech. It's always exciting to see this type of new technology coming in and actually helping with biodiversity conservation. So here the idea is that every client who has this app can do a good action by taking, for example, the subway instead of a car, and gain points every time they do a sustainable action. Every time they earn points, they grow a virtual tree, and this virtual tree is then planted by fintech in collaboration with WWF. Here again, we always have in mind the fact that we don't want to plant a forest of eucalyptus. So what is need to be done is to have an ecosystem approach and plant endemic trees and do it well. We have, for example, in Zambia, they're working with green bond. Often green bonds are actually used for energy, but green bonds are growing extremely fast, and they're also an opportunity to use for biodiversity. So now it's starting to be used for biodiversity and needs to improve and needs to increase. And in Zambia, they're currently working on this, on putting a part of this green bond going directly into biodiversity aspects. We have a lot of other examples, like Indonesia using the green sukuk, which is a little bit like a green bond to finance a conservation center for birds. Actually, they might use also the zakat, which is basically a donation in Islamic finance, to support organic agricultures with communities. In Rwanda, they're collecting fees and fines that need to go through FONERWA, the national fund, to actually finance then biodiversity projects. And this is an example of, for example, existing mechanism that needs to be improved is that according to the law, these fees and fines need to go to the fund, but are currently not actually going there yet. So the law is there, the mechanism is there, now it needs to be put in place. So there are a lot of exciting new opportunities. I just quoted some. I'm happy to say more. Thank you. Get it to the others now.
Yeah, actually, I was also just there's lots of kind of quite new, complex themes and topics coming out there. So I just wondered if you also just wanted to say, Marco, what do you think our landscape leaders need to do next in their journeys at the moment towards sustainable funding and financing? If you were kind of going to, advise them.
Well, if you mean leader by governments, I would say often we're speaking about these harmful subsidies that should be redirected. There's a lot of work going on with the CBD COP on this. So we see more work on this because, again, this is going to have an extremely important impact. It needs to be done well so that it doesn't affect actually badly the farmers. But there are some countries already did it, like Switzerland. Italy is working on it. Sri Lanka did one on rice. So there is a possibility to do it and to do it well without affecting too much the farmers and to make it green. So this will be having a big impact, and then it's actually mainstreaming finance biodiversity in those other sectors that we don't always think about. But for example, there's a lot of work going on finance disclosure for the finance sector and actually understanding how much they're impacting and how much risk they have with investments that are harming biodiversity. We need to also put, for example, in Georgia, we're working with a unit that just got created in the National Forest Agency to create ecotourism opportunity to finance the forest. So we need to bring this biodiversity finance in all these different sectors and mainstreaming so that actually we can work together and have a positive impact fast.
Yeah, so really maximizing what's already there and making that more efficient and directed towards biodiversity. Thank you very much, Marco. So I'm going to come to Catalin now, and I'm just wondering if you'd like to share some of these kind of new exciting examples and models that you're seeing coming through from your experience, Catalin.
Definitely, thank you. And I would like to add on what Jim said in his intro, that I also very much advocate for bringing in the private sector. If you think about it, most of the land, at least in Latin America, large portions of the land that are suitable for restoration, for example, if you look at degraded farmland, is privately owned, actually. So, I mean, that's one argument I like to use, and the other one being that the big financial flows, the big volumes, if you think about who invests in what, is in the private sector. So it's usually the types of projects that I see where I think they are very successful and they are able to scale it up. They do so by involving the private sector, either because they manage to compartmentalize their service provision, and they find one segment or one compartment that has a market, whether it's the carbon market or whether it's an actual commodity market, like we've seen in the yerba mate example from Paraguay. I think that was a good example. Or you can bring in the private sector by using their existing channels like commercial banks. So that's a project I'm working on currently in El Salvador, where we are working with a very traditional agricultural bank that is lending to smallholder farmers or also bigger size family businesses, and looking at their portfolio and seeing how can they create new very specified credit lines for farmers who want to improve something on their, on their little area at least. Mostly they have some remaining forest, but so you can direct finance towards keeping that, or you can direct finance towards improving maybe a coffee farm that's not ideally shaded, and you can transform it into a very well managed agroforestry system by providing a loan. So I think these are very great examples of how to bring in the private sector. And I don't know if I'm able or I'm allowed to advertise here other projects, but I want to. I want to mention my favorite project that that is in Mexico, actually, and I first learned about it when I worked at the IDB as a lending officer, and they came to us seeking financing. It's called Ejido Verde. If they are in the audience out there, please please say hi. That's actually a project that started as a donor-funded local NGO type initiative with reforesting with native pine trees in a Michoacan region of Mexico. And the way they were able to scale it up was that they partnered with their private sector off-taker. So the company that was buying the pine resin, in this case, to make chemical products out of it. And they used this existing partnership to create actual, social business. So they created a new company that is now engaging local communities to reforest and manage newly planted pine trees themselves, sell the resin to the off-taker company, which is a local family business, and they then, they pay the farmers for the raw material, and they were actually the main sponsor for taking on a big bank loan for the IDB. So the private company was actually needed as a security, and to provide all this, you know, all the processes and paperwork that needs to be in place for an entity to actually access bigger chunks of finance. I can actually, this is where the typing in the link comes in now. Let me try.
Yeah, it's
And
really
put it
interesting
in
to
the
hear
chat
the
here.
essential role that the private sector has been playing there in enabling the kind of scaling up of more sustainable landscape management. And I'm really hearing that coming through, these really diverse partnerships and stakeholders that need to be brought together in these landscapes. Thanks for sharing that, Catalin. So I'm just going to come to Jim now, and I'm just wondering, Jim, if you have any reflections at this point to add to, for example, the second question on the slide there about how can these donor-funded projects look to evolve into kind of sustainable models, sustainable approaches from funding financing perspectives, or any reflections on what our teams need to do next in their journeys. That would be brilliant.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Alice. And I suppose I'll build off of what Catalin was mentioning about the engagement of the local financial sector. There's, I think from what I can see from the examples, we've got enterprises that have cash flows. They're using concessional and impact finance to show how those business models can work. And to my mind, they can act as really important demonstrators to engage the local finance sector and if they want to scale up, if they want to implement larger scale outgrower programs that require farmers maybe to take on a bit of lending to get involved, that's really where these local banks that have the footprint in these rural areas, they have the extension officers, that's where they can really come in. But often, this isn't a business that they, conservation focused programs are not their bread and butter. They don't necessarily have an immediate commercial interest in going there and expanding their activity there. So what can either a local an NGO or a donor funded program do to encourage that? I think one thing is to help them access data and information on farmers in a program. And there are some really exciting examples of digital advisory services that are helping, that are collecting data on farms and then helping farmers use that to show their collateral and their cash flows and their assets that they need to be able to get these loans to invest in biodiversity friendly practices like agroforestry or converting farming practices. Another exciting development is actually providing wholesale finance to these financial institutions at a concessional rate, because the opportunity there, of course, is that interest rates domestically tend to be at least in the double digits, but there are DFIs, there are impact investors willing to operate in the single digits and provide some concessional finance that is attractive to local banks. And there's a project in Southeast Asia that is doing that at the moment, using $100 million of international climate finance for a local bank to distribute onwards for climate change and conservation focused projects. I think at a more sectoral level, there's a role that the NGO sector can play just in helping to move the sector forward. So there are some great examples of international NGOs convening green finance working groups and initiatives in a number of the countries that are discussed today. And those are at relatively early stage at the moment. A lot of that is focused on general ESG issues, and in some countries, like in Brazil, actually taking the Task Force on Climate-related Financial Disclosures, the recommendations of that to a country level, we're not necessarily at the stage of them focusing on conservation and sustainable land use yet. But at an international level, we do have things like potentially the Task Force on Nature-related risk, following the model of the TCFD. And if that gets translated down to a national level in the coming 5 years or more, that's a real opportunity to engage the local financial sector more on these issues. And local NGOs, we encourage our clients or NGOs to really get engaged in that, because they have influence and they have brand impact. And
thanks,
they do have
Jim.
power.
Thank you so much. I totally agree. I think there's a really key kind of role emerging here, that NGOs, we need to be involved in these dialogues about how we can kind of structure finance for biodiversity and conservation that is then more accessible and realistic to us in our role as implementers in these landscapes. So Marco, I can see you're holding your hand up, but I'm just at this stage, I'm sorry, because of the time, I'm going to open up the floor to our audience who've been waiting very patiently, and I'm going to hand over to Brina Griffin, head of the Forest Programme, who's going to be moderating our discussion for today. But I'm hoping we'll be able to come back to you, Marco, because I'm sure your insight will be very valuable. But thank you so much to you, all the speakers so far. Over to you, Brina, with questions from the floor. Thank you very much.
Hi, guys. Yeah, this has been great. And if diversity of approaches is the theme of the day, the diversity of questions is really evident. We have questions, everything from sort of high-level questions about finance to really technical questions about agroforestry. So I'm going to focus, given that we only have like 15 minutes, I'm going to focus on some of the questions for the landscape leads. And one of the ones, we've heard a little bit about the finance, the challenges kind of from a theoretical level of turning agroforestry or smallholder farming into kind of bankable businesses or profit turning businesses. So I wanted to actually talk to some of the landscape leads and think about what you guys are doing. We've had this question from a whole bunch of people. So maybe Adi or Elise or Evelyn or Vorsak, do you guys have any thoughts on kind of the challenges that you have faced or that the local farmers that you're working with have faced about kind of turning these sustainable agroforestry into workable business models? And I'm going to unmute everybody.
Okay. So I think I could start with that one. The challenge was the producers know a lot about shade-borne yerba mate production, but introducing like an organic model was kind of new to them because they are now used to producing by using chemical products. So that has been a process. It took us more than 3 years, and it has been possible. So we are all very proud of it. And the challenge was like to develop that training during those years. And it has taken time, but it has gone great. Thank you.
Great. And Adi, we have a question specifically about some of the challenges related to logistical costs and the lack of infrastructure in remote areas. And I know that's an issue for you and the farmers that are working growing candlenut and some of the other products in the landscape. Could you talk a little bit about how you manage that or how you're helping them manage that?
So the case for candlenut is the crop itself has been grown by local communities in a sustainable way, but the problem lies on the value chains, that it was controlled heavily by middlemen up to 4 to 5 level. So the price at the local level remains very low for very long time. So the main intervention is to get all the farmers in one cooperative and works together to break free their independence from the middlemen, set up new cooperative. But then there's still one challenge that we had at that time, because to be able to do so, we have to have a seed capital to buy from the farmers. Otherwise, they will keep depending on the middleman. And once we got a grant from our donor at that time, when the cooperative can purchase from the farmers and solve the capital problem. And also the cooperative works together, sort out the transportation problems, and manage to, we help communicating with the wholesaler in Java Island, so that finally the transporting of the crops from Labuan Bajo to Surabaya has been solved, and this business has been in a good position up to now. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And we have another question along the similar lines. Vorsak, I wanted to ask you this question, and it's about essentially the difference between sort of the traditional agriculture where, you know, large companies and elites benefit, and why investing in smallholder farmers like you're doing with the IBIS rice program, how that can really help them benefit from sustainable solutions rather than just the wealthy getting more wealthy, essentially. Could you talk a little bit about sort of in your landscape, the different kinds of agriculture and who's benefited from what?
Yeah, I mean, in the Lompat landscape, like I talked, there is a big agro industry plantation, but this is not benefit to local community. This is a big investor who doing this 1,000 hectare have been converted to monocrops. So IBIS rice support the local community. I mean, they within that area, they have rice field, which is traditional. They have there for a long time ago, less than 1 hectare, or even little bigger than 1 hectare. So we need to ensure that they can generate more money from their rice field, the food. I mean, to ensure that they have enough food security from their 1 hectare land, we need to have them. So in terms of IBIS rice, or in terms of wildlife friendly rice, I think it's more benefit to the forest than the others, because from the engagement we have I mean, actually more than 10 conditions in order to exchange for a premium price. And our partner, IBIS Rice Company and SMP, provide something they call agricultural support, and as well as finding market for them. IBIS Rice already has like a capital for buying the rice in premium price from the farmer. So yeah, I mean, we have set up the compliance unit on the ground to ensure that the engaged farmers apply this criteria. So that's why this kind of model, we see that it's really benefit to the forest and also support the livelihood. So I mean, yeah.
Great, that's, yeah, perfect, thank you. So we also have a couple of questions about government policies, and I know Marco spoke a little bit about this from Biofin's perspective, but I know Elise, in Brazil, you guys are working with some elements of the Brazil Forest Code, as well as some of the local governance that provides incentives for forests. So I was wondering whether you could talk a little bit about that, and in particular, we had some questions about making those policies work better. So could you provide some thoughts or experience on that?
Sure. So in Brazil, there is an incentive that comes from a sales tax called ICMS Ecológico. And basically, municipalities can receive a revenue corresponding to the presence and size of protected areas inside their boundaries, both public and private. And this can encourage the local governments to incentivize landowners to create private reserves. And in our case, for example, only the presence of our reserve in this municipality called Lagoa dos Gatos has provided over $20,000 to this municipality, where we are over the past about 7 years. So there is this incentive, which is something we can work with, because it makes it so much easier for us to encourage the municipalities to incentivize this kind of forest protection. And also something else that's going to help us is the Brazilian Forest Code, because according to the law, a property has to maintain at least a certain amount of forest preserved inside their boundaries. And this varies according to percentage, or if it's close to a spring, or depending on how steep the terrain is. But the situation is, as I said in my presentation, there is a huge forest that of about 27,000 hectares that should be forest right now in this landscape, but they're not, they're degraded lands. So we're gonna help people comply with this law by helping them restore their lands. Because if we help them do this, they're gonna be complying with the law, and they're gonna have forest in their land, they're gonna have water and all of the ecosystem service. And we wanna do this integrated with agroforestry, so that they can also have some revenue from selling commodities.
Great. And kind of related to that, and I'm interested kind of in any of your perspectives. We had a question about the challenge of political interests who maybe don't have the same long-term view and don't necessarily value sustainability. So how do we make these sort of smaller projects work in a context of maybe where the political situation or the economic situation doesn't really value sustainability? Does anyone from the landscapes have any thoughts on that? Or otherwise I can open it up to some of our finance speakers who may have some perspective on that.
Yes.
Jim or Adi, go ahead.
Yeah. Normally in the initiation phase, the solution that we propose to the local authority or stakeholders are less favorable to them. But as time goes by and we initiated our pilot, and then the pilot started to show some results, and then the buy-ins start to come from the various stakeholders, and that's how we managed to scale up the first initiative up to the support comes from the other actors.
Right, so showing actual results helps convince people.
Yep.
Right, and I guess that's another argument for needing some of that grant funding to start any of these projects, because you need to kind of prove your concept, and then you can start developing a business model from there.
Absolutely.
That's great. Catlin, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I totally agree with Adi, and I think just adding, I think you want at farm level, you have to show results and you have to show profitability for the single farmer who needs to make ends meet. I mean, they need to create an income. So if you switch from a mainstream agricultural model to a quite complex agroforestry model, maybe, and you even need external financing, which is hard enough to seek, then you have to demonstrate both to the farmer and to the entity giving you the external financing that you will be able to bridge this initial gap in your cash flow with the long-term income that maybe you have to wait for 5 years or even 10 years. So I think the
Right.
profitability at farm level is also very important to demonstrate
Right.
it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I actually, Jim, you can make your comment. You're welcome to add it. And I have another question for you when you're done as well.
Just a quick point on this, because I think it's really important thinking about the political economy of these landscapes and what the vested interests are. And that is often those interests follow the finance. So if you can engage with the financiers further up the value chain, they're actually financing these companies or intermediaries. That's a way to actually get their attention and help change their practices. That is not always possible, because often, some of these are privately funded enterprises, family enterprises, so you don't have that hook. But there is enough of the sector that is exposed to international financing, or at least responsible domestic financing, that you can make a difference there.
Great. Yeah, we did. I was going to mention, we did get a few questions about sort of what the finance sector is doing. I don't know that we can address those in this session, but I do think there's quite a bit of interest in kind of the larger finance, global finance sector, and how they're engaging in this issue. But I was going to ask a question to you. We had a question about M&E, and in one of your responses earlier, Jim, you mentioned sort of data and the importance of data. And if you could just talk a little bit about the kinds of data, or what kinds of data are needed to understand whether these approaches are actually really working.
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's so in this Coalition for Private Investment and Conservation, which Brina is active in. There's around 70 impact investors, banks, research organisations who one of the big challenges they face and the questions they face are, okay, you can get something that is generating cash flows and is financially sustainable, but what is the actual conservation impact? And that is, I think, one of the most challenging issues at the moment in private investment and conservation. Because I think the broad thesis at the moment is that if you are investing in enterprises that provide an alternative economic opportunity for actors in the landscape, you're going to divert pressure away from activities that are harmful to the landscape. But we don't yet have an awful lot of impact data on that yet. Yeah, a lot of it follows this sustainable intensification theory. So that's definitely a challenge that we have. There are more maybe models that are just more directly conservation focused and that provide direct resources for conservation activities like patrolling and enforcement, whether that's from forest carbon or ecotourism or levies from park fees and things like this. That's easier to more directly connect, but just a recognition that this is something that people are focused on, and it's emerging, and hopefully in the next few years we'll see more of it.
Yeah, and I think that's something that for all of our landscape leads and all the other landscapes that we work with across the BirdLife family, you know, thinking about better understanding our impact and understanding the impact when we're not doing just straight conservation, when we're actually working with communities and those indirect impacts. That's a huge challenge, as you said. So that's something we're definitely going to be doing some thinking on and looking at some of the examples in the landscapes already. So I just want to say we're out of time for questions, which is a shame because there's so many good questions, really, really good questions, guys. We could do a whole other hour just on some of these topics, I'm sure. But I want to turn back to Katie and Alice to close us out as we're just about on time. And thank you so much for the people who asked questions online, and also to those of you guys who just answered questions on the spot. Thanks very much.
Wonderful. Wow. Thank you so much for all those fantastic questions. There are some kind of really interesting messages emerging from me there. Solutions for forests are so diverse, so varied, and likewise the opportunities for sustainable funding and financing for these are equally diverse. We were hearing about loads of different approaches and including some new really exciting models emerging. And I think what comes through to me here is that we really need to be challenging ourselves and going outside of our comfort zones in order to maximize these opportunities. It's also really clear that we are needing to bring together so many different types of stakeholders to actually enable these impacts. You know, requiring really different stakeholders from the local people, the farmers, local banks, mainstream investors, the financiers in the supply chain, local businesses and private sector, and really broad engagement across the government. So, you know, creating these best practice models can be really influential, and conservation programs, you know, they're not really the traditional bread and butter of the finance sector, but we need to come together to change this. The transparency and disclosure from the finance sector is really going to help, but actually there's a really important role for NGOs in sharing our data around impact and using that to influence decisions around the ways that funding and financing can be structured to be more accessible and relevant in these landscapes. And likewise, there's also an important role in us to advocate for the reallocation of harmful subsidies and disincentives towards more sustainable practices that at the same time, it's absolutely critical, are still empowering local farmers. So, you know, being profitable and bankable, how can we do this? And it's kind of really starting with demonstrating our impacts, particularly critical at the farm level and to the individual, and being profitable to these people. And something that just strikes me is just the long-term commitment and nature of these initiatives is really inspiring. I mean, decades and decades of investment to date in these landscapes, and clearly we're going to be there for many, many more decades to come. So thank you so much for that. We're getting lots of comments about how to get involved. We're really actively looking for collaborations and support. If you'd like to carry on the conversation with us, please connect with us through the networking facility. We're also participating in the learning track on the finance and value chain, so you can join our community if you're interested. We have a web page on the BirdLife website, which is for the accelerator program, forests@birdlife.org, which we are sharing with you in the chat box. You can find our email address there, so please do get in touch. Our new brochure's coming. Keep a lookout for that, for our accelerator landscapes on this webpage. It's going to include information for all of our portfolio from Argentina, Kenya, Vietnam, Madagascar, Sierra Leone, Liberia. We're also sharing our the animation video, which people were really loving, obviously, that will be available. So, and just to close out, the decisions we make are affecting these landscapes in so many ways, the decisions you are making today. So let's choose to invest in forest positive solutions. Thank you so much to all our speakers. It's been a fab session. And to the audience, enjoy the rest of the Global Landscapes Forum. Thank you very much.